Today's Smokin' in the Girls' Room, so we're going to be covering the Ebola virus, which for the first time in the history of the United States is here as of this morning, I believe at about 11:30 a.m. The first Ebola patient, who is an American citizen, he is a doctor, came in via plane, and the second person, I believe, will be arriving.
Right, they can only one patient at a time.
Only one patient at a time. So we're going to be talking about the Ebola virus.
What about Cindy? We should make Cindy go first because she did all the research and she's been absent.
All right, Ebola. Ebola. I did a little historical research, and it first appeared in 1976, and it takes its name from the Ebola River, which is near a village where that first outbreak started in 1976. The virus is transmitted to people from wild animals, and it spreads human to human through contact with an infected person's bodily fluids. Vomit, blood, sweat, any fluids. Fruit bats, which are implicated in this current breakout of Ebola, are considered to be a natural host of the disease.
Without being affected by it, which was interesting.
Yeah. It's introduced into the human population through close contact with the blood, organs, or bodily fluids of an infected animal.
And in Africa, isn't that why it spreads so widely there? Because they eat bush meat. They eat fruit bats and other animals from the bush that could be contaminated.
And they also the human population is in close proximity to the animals. Even if they don't eat the bush meat, if they have occasion to get blood or some type of saliva on them from an infected animal and it gets into their bloodstream, then the infection starts. They've also had the infection in other animals such as chimpanzees, gorillas, monkeys, forest antelope, pigs. It comes through human to animal contact and then human to human contact from bodily fluids. So there's a little history.
And no cure.
Ebola. No cure.
No cure. Right. No vaccination to prevent against it and no cure.
Well, of course not. There's never any vaccination to protect against any disease that springs from the dark continent. Let's just be clear about that right now.
I love you, Gabrielle.
But really, I'm serious. My question is, since 1976, people have been eating bush meat, living amongst the animals, doing all that stuff since time immemorial. What has happened in Africa from then till now that has suddenly made stuff on the continent so freaking deadly? I understand the disease element of it. I understand the contagion factor. But there has to have been something that has changed dramatically in order to make it so that people are not allowed to eat the meat that they've been eating for generations.
They don't really know that that's the genesis of it or not. They're not sure.
So then to focus it on that, I mean, I think it's kind of unfair. You know, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the main thing that they're saying, but I read one thing that they were saying not to eat the bushmeat, but I don't know if that's what they're saying the genesis of this is.
Right. Well, when you asked about a change, one of the articles I read actually indicated that because we're cutting down rainforests and a lot of viruses and pathogens live in the rainforest and we're destroying the habitat, we're releasing things into the environment
that did not exist before.
And
that might be the change you're talking about.
That's exactly where I'm going. It's just like, this is a horrible thing, but I think that the West is culpable in creating those changes. So I just wanted to get that right off the top of my head there.
The good news, Gabrielle, is that when you mention a vaccine, they are working on a vaccine right now. And the vaccine, they've been working on it for a couple of years. The National Institute of Health in the United States has been working on it, and they may start testing in September.
Right. There's also a serum, but the one thing that I read about the spread of it in Africa is because a lot of people that live in the bush, they don't believe in traditional medicine.
That's right.
So what they'll do is their family members will get sick, and they will treat them at home. And then the other family members and whole families end up getting wiped out, and then they dispose of the bodies by burying them instead of burning them. So that's one of the reasons that it's more likely to spread in a third world country than maybe here in the United States. Because I know that when I initially read that they were bringing an Ebola patient here, I'm like, oh my God, that's awful. We're going to have, contagion. And spread.
Personally, I think that the missionaries should stay in the area where they got sick.
Yes, I agree.
I'm really not into missionaries at all, but if you feel like you have to go over and save the dark continent and you get sick there, you should die there.
I agree. I don't think they should come back here either.
I don't either, especially when you read about what they're going to do for them. Basically, since there is no cure, they're going to give them oxygen, which that's easy to administer over there. They were going to give them IV, easy to administer, and maybe blood or blood platelets.
Well, there was one serum dose that they gave the woman, Nancy, whatever her name was.
But they're so ill. Why would you travel somebody that ill anyway?
Well, Dr. Brantley actually got out of the van on his own steam, and he was given a blood transfusion from a 14-year-old kid that he treated, and the kid survived. And apparently that's kind of a last resort thing where they'll give somebody blood from someone else that has survived, hoping that maybe the antibodies will help them.
But why here?
They can give
I agree.
blood transfusions in Africa. They do that.
I'm wondering, why are they bringing them here?
And
All right, I'm going to take the other position. I argued this position with my family members who disagreed with me, and they agreed with you. They felt that these two contaminated people should not be transported to the United States and treated here. And I take the position, yes, if we have the ability to treat them and perhaps offer them more medical care than what they could receive where they are, save these individuals and maybe develop different ways to treat this disease. It's a horrific disease, and they're studying this disease, and they're trying to find treatments for it. And if bringing these people over and having them in the right situation so that they don't cause any harm to anybody else, why not?
Well, why not do it over there, though, when there's only Emory Hospital in Atlanta is only one of 4 hospitals that's able to even handle something like this.
Right.
Why introduce such a deadly disease? Who cares about the United States to any other country? Why do that when you can actually help them over in their own country?
Do you think we would have heard about this if there weren't people coming to the United States to be treated?
Americans coming to the United States.
That's what I don't know if we would have even heard about this story.
It piqued the interest. I've actually asked Carm a couple of times to talk about this because I've been sort of obsessed with Ebola ever since I read The Hot Zone back in 1994, which is a really, really great book about this. It's been fascinating to me, so I've been interested in the topic. But it seems like ever since they said these 2 people were coming here, God forbid, to our country, all of a sudden everybody's interested.
Right.
Maybe that's, in some ways, that's a bad thing, but in some ways, perhaps it's a good thing to
bring about a
research.
cure.
And I was reading that this current outbreak, there's a 60% rate of death with people with Ebola, as opposed to in the past a 90% rate. So I don't know if
I think it depends on the strain.
What I read. And what Gabrielle had said earlier, like what's changed? Like what
could be the rainforest being cut down,
right?
And all.
I see when I look at Africa and I see what it's been going through in the last 100 years alone. I won't even go into colonialism or slavery or any of that stuff. But what the West has been doing in that continent is sick. And I think they are directly culpable. I think that you cannot expect to go into a country, suck all the oil out, have little children digging for coltan, filthy up the water, and expect nothing to happen. These people have to eat. They have to, they're going to rely on their traditional sources of food and nourishment and sugar. And to not take that into consideration, and these people go over with these big, broad ideas, we're missionaries. We're going to bring you to God. We're going to educate you. We're going to, and all they do is just pull up their pants and take a big fat dump on the continent. And this is the result. Bottom line.
Gabrielle, I don't think anybody is blaming the people that are getting sick. And I think that the 2 people that they're bringing back to the country to treat were over there to help treat sick people. You have to look beyond what may be wrong about missionaries going over to different parts of Africa, Western Africa in particular, and you have to look at what is this about. This is about Ebola. It's about a horrific virus that is killing a lot of people, and what is going to ultimately help people. And helping people may mean coming up with vaccines, coming up with serum, research, bringing these 2 people back, trying different techniques to see if they work, and exporting those techniques to save lives in Africa.
What they'll do is they'll export the non-approved FDC medications to the dark continent, and they'll experiment on those people with it.
They're not going to. I mean, all the AIDS people, all the people who have AIDS in Africa, we have drugs that are not curing, but they're allowing people to live healthy, productive, normal lives. Africans are not getting those.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't understand that. They may develop some brilliant vaccine. The Africans will never see it.
But that's the only place where Ebola has come from, is Africa. We haven't seen it in other parts of the world.
So they'll create a vaccine that's only used on American or European missionaries when they get sick.
Well,
we don't know that yet, though.
Yeah, I think you have to do the research and try to come up with something to cure this horrific disease. And it's a horrific way to die. And there are children that are being left without parents. There are parents who are being left without children. There are families that are dying. The primary interest right now should be an eradication of this disease.
To stop the spread, because it gets exponential. I mean, it is the more people that get infected, the faster it grows.
Exactly.
It's really frightening. And once it reaches a certain tipping point, it becomes out of control. And actually, the World Health Organization is already calling this outbreak almost out of control.
Exactly.
And that's frightening because...
and I think I think that's the biggest fear. It's the disease, of course, but it's the spread of it.
Yes.
It seems huge
especially
to everybody.
With world travel. There was one guy that actually traveled... He was an American. I only read about this in one place. An American named Patrick Sawyer. He got ill on a flight to Lagos when he vomited all over the plane. He was found to have Ebola, taken off the plane. He died 5 days later. But that plane stopped in 3 different places in the country before he was sick and removed from the plane. They said they found 67 other people that they quarantined that he came into contact with, but they're really not sure if he came into contact with anybody else. And as I understand it, once you're sick, that's when you become contagious. It's not the 21 days leading up to becoming sick, but he was vomiting, he was exhibiting all the symptoms, so he was obviously contagious. That's the frightening part. Somebody getting on a plane.
Just one other person. Right.
Yes.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
You don't
Patient
know.
zero.
I thought it was interesting, too, that the Ebola virus, there's 5 different kinds of them, and this happens to be obviously a very bad strain of it. But in the 40-year history of it being known as a disease, it's not changed. So it's not a rapidly changing type of virus like some of our viruses. They morph very quickly. This has not at all. So they do think they can get a better grip on it. But like Val said, the planes, it was the people in the bush originally, and now they've moved into the cities for any number of reasons. And there are airports in the cities, and people travel much more. And that's the fear. It's so deadly. There is no antibiotic, no cure, nothing. So I think the fear is, where's it going to go? And it's not just America. I think it's worldwide. There's a fear of it. And you have one person and you touch their fluid, who knows where it will go from there? You have no idea.
And from what I read, because I was curious, how did these treating professionals contract the disease? Because they're suited up.
Did you see the
they're
conditions
decontaminated. Well, they said that it can happen when they're decontaminating them, when they're coming out from working with the patients. And if any fluid is left on part of their outfit, their gloves, for example, when they take them off, and if that gets into any opening in their skin, that can cause the infection.
Well, it's not like they're working in buildings and hospitals. They're working in tents. They're working in a very primitive environment, and I'm surprised that more of them haven't gotten infected. And I was reading that the Peace Corps and Samaritan's Purse, which is the other organization that's out there, are actually removing people from the area, which is the worst possible thing that could happen.
Exactly.
We need more aid workers. We need more of a response. Gabrielle doesn't. Why don't you agree? What do you think?
I've never seen any positive result come from all of this aid. All I've seen, the more aid people send to Africa, the worse things get, the poorer people get, they have less food, their medical... I don't see any positive outcome from all of this aid.
So just have everybody leave and let them just die? I'm not under sure.
So what is the around with their environment, maybe it would cure itself.
Here's the thing. That's a given. The environment, all that stuff that has happened is true, and it's horrible. But we have what we have. So what's the answer? If the aid workers leave, what do we do?
Or they choose to stay there. I mean, you make a commitment. You either you do or you don't.
They've gone in, and now they're saying that it's so much out of control that their workers are now being susceptible to getting the disease. So they're pulling them out. So what's the answer? Do nothing?
I don't know, but I don't think the right thing to do is to bring them here.
I don't think that we should bring the patients here either. But my question to you is, if we don't have aid workers over there, the Peace Corps or whatever,
but what are they doing?
What do we do? They're actually trying to. They're treating patients. They're trying to make sure that they stop the spread of it.
How are they treating them?
There isn't, but they're getting them out. They're getting them away from the care of a person that's sick in their house. Then they in turn get infected. affected.
Isn't the Red Cross is really the biggest organization that's instrumental
and Doctors Without Borders is very big
in intercepting, getting the families out of the environment.
Didn't one of the leading research doctors die?
He did. The leading research doctor just died.
He just died.
But they're also trying to keep these patients as comfortable as possible by hydrating them. So even if there is no cure, there's palliative care.
And some do survive.
And some people do survive.
They don't know why.
Africans can provide palliative care. We can give people water. We can give them blood transfusions. We can do all of those things. You don't have to be in the West to be able to do that.
But I think what these aid organizations do is they take in the facilities, the tents, the quarantines, all of the garb that they have to wear, the medicine. They bring it to these areas so that they can get these sick people out of the homes and into an area where they can be quarantined.
I understand what you're saying. I really do. And I don't have an answer. I have yet to see any real result from aid from the West, ever. I've just never seen it.
So the countries themselves don't seem to be doing anything, though. I don't hear anything about the actual governments there doing anything, sending in aid workers. What do they do?
I don't really think that it would really matter to anybody if there wasn't something on the continent that people wanted, and that's the bottom line for me. If Africa had no natural resources, that entire continent could die of Ebola and nobody would give a damn. So I look at it that way. I do. It's true. There's something there that we want. So now we send in aid and workers and education and blah, 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 which helps nobody, which demeans and brings down the people further with all of this help, and nothing gets done. And they're only there because there's a bottom line interest. If there was nothing there, if it was a desert, if there were no diamonds, no gold, no oil, no coltan, we would give a damn about what's going on there.
That's a cynical view.
But it's true.
I finally met somebody more cynical than me.
It may be true, Gabriella, for some people. But I think there are aid workers. There are people that care about other people, that have a humanitarian mission and want to help other people and eliminate suffering where they can. There are people like that in all parts of the world, not just in Africa. And I commend them. And they're going into an extremely dangerous situation for them. They're jeopardizing their own health to help other people. They're not in the diamond mines. They're not on the
part of the deal. You go into danger zone, you might die. That's the bottom line.
Yes, that's true. But they're not saying that. They're just going in and doing it. They're humanitarian. They're the people
just like
that
Doctors Without Borders. They're
do good things for the world. I'm not that cynical yet to think that everybody has an ulterior motive for doing something good.
I'm not speaking of individuals. I'm speaking of governments and organizations that create these things. I'm not talking about individuals.
But the governments of these countries themselves aren't doing it. They're not stepping up. They're declaring a state of emergency, that's it. That's all they're doing.
That's pretty much all they can do. I mean, they
should have their own aid workers.
Of resources that we have. So
then, hence, we have to send in the resources. Then, or these private organizations, these humanitarian organizations, have to send in helpers, have to send people. Well, I think they do. We can't allow this to spread.
From what I watched on doing the research on this and watching some of the videos, they do have their own aid workers. They do have their own doctors. They do have a culture there that is equipped to
deal with this.
To deal with it. And I think that that's overlooked. It was the last epidemic that they had. When was that? Back
in the 90s, I think, the early 90s.
There was one of the nurses contracted it during a big outbreak, and they had all these other physicians and specialists from all over the world there on a summit trying to figure out what they could do and to study this. And one of the West African doctors wanted to do, they had patients, the surviving patients, they had the antibodies, and he wanted to do a blood transfusion on this woman who was a nurse who had contracted it, and every other doctor from every other country outside of Africa was opposed to it. But they went ahead and did it anyway. She came out of it. She recovered.
Right. Well, that's what this Dr. Brantley was given a blood transfusion, and he walked off that van under his own power.
Right. So there seems to be
very, very sick.
Excuse me for saying this. I mean, maybe I do sound bitter too, or cynical, but but there seems to also be a disrespect for their medical experts in West Africa, and that was a clear-cut case of that, where every doctor opposed, but it worked. And it still hasn't been recognized since that outbreak, which is how many years later? Nobody paid attention to it. Nobody did anything. There hasn't been enough research done. But now that it's here in America, all of a sudden, we got to find it. We've got to find it.
But that's what we do.
That's what we do.
We wait till things happen. And
but I think that's what that's a part of what Gabrielle's saying as well.
I absolutely get that.
And
I get that.
It's hard not to be suspicious or cynical if you created the problem and now going to go in and swoop in like, oh, we're going to save it now. It's just.
But we don't know what created the problem yet. One of the thoughts is that it is emanating from the rainforest and the destruction of the rainforest. But I don't think we can. None of us on this panel today can say with any certainty where Ebola has come from. It's a virus. It's a deadly virus. It's something that does need to be fully studied, and treatments have to be investigated because it should not continue to kill people like it is killing people. Mm-hmm. And it runs in cycles. They find it cyclical. There'll be an outbreak, and then there'll be a hiatus for a couple of years, and then it comes back. And this is a particularly bad outbreak. It's impacting people in multiple countries,
right?
Well, I didn't mean to sound so cynical. We do have building hospitals there, like in real buildings. We do have those kind of facilities, where it's not all in huts and tents and everything. I mean, it's just kind of
what I've seen out in the rural areas.
Right. No doubt about it. And I think the people in these countries want to find a cure. They're as determined as anybody else. But I remain that optimistic person that thinks there are still good people in the world who are helping for the sake of helping to make the world a better place. And that's where I'm coming from. And if we can do that, let's do it.
I believe that too, but if as individuals go, of course.
As individuals, that's what I'm saying.
If they're working within a system,
I don't buy
that's a government thing, or they're working within a system that's not in agreement with their humanitarian causes.
But what's your response to the National Institute of Health working on a vaccine?
We have a phone call right now. Hold the question, Cindy. A caller, are you with us?
I am. How are you?
How are you? Who is calling today?
This is Deanna.
And where are you calling from today, Deanna?
I'm calling from Lawrence.
Tell us your thoughts.
Well, my thoughts are, given that they keep discovering new species in the rainforest, typically nature has a cure for its own issues. So I'm assuming that if they study the rainforest, there's got to be something naturally that is a cure for what the Ebola virus is, which I think is evolving because we're invading its space. Mm-hmm. You know how they have the superbugs and the viruses and the bacteria that evolved so that nobody can cure it. There's got to be something in nature that would cure it.
I agree with you 100%.
But we haven't studied it, only because now that Americans are getting infected, perhaps they will start to study it a little bit more. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Which is sad.
Well, the World Health Organization came out in April of 2014, and they say the natural host of the Ebola virus is the fruit bat. So we might want to start there. And, of course, it's transmitted when they bite animals, and then other animals get infected, and their bodily fluids, get into humans, however, any which way. So they do know, actually, the origin of where it comes from, and maybe that's where they can start to figure out the cure for it.
Do animals pass away from this as well?
Do animals die from this?
The fruit bats are carriers, but they're immune. They're immune to it. Wasn't there an epidemic amongst animals? And
I think pigs.
Was it pigs?
Yeah.
Did it kill the pigs?
In the United States.
Yeah, they had to slaughter all the pigs.
Yeah, there was a movie that was based on a virus that came from a pig in a third world country. I can't think of the name of it.
It was Contagion.
Well, there
might have been Contagion. Yeah.
There was the Ebola restin strain that was detected in pigs in the Philippines back a few years.
Ebola in the Philippines.
In the Philippines, they discovered it was detected. I don't know as if it was the same strain. It was the Ebola restin.
Different strain.
A different strain. It was detected in the pigs in the Philippines.
And that is not known so far to be carried to humans. It doesn't have the same risk.
Didn't jump species.
No.
Well, the World Health Organization says that it's documented through the handling of infected chimpanzees, gorillas, fruit bats, monkeys, and forest antelope and porcupines. So when humans handle those that are infected by the virus, that's where they contract it from.
Well, what do fruit bats have genetically that we don't? Why are they immune?
Some animals are just carriers, natural carriers.
Some people are. So, Deanna, how do you feel about having the 2 patients brought to the United States that are infected with Ebola?
Well, I'm definitely not pleased about it. I don't think that they're taking into account, you know how they always say sacrifice one and save many? I don't think it's a smart idea to bring people here who have a virus that's known not to have a cure. I mean, it sounds like they're getting close to figuring out something, considering some of these people are surviving via transfusions. But that would be like bringing somebody that has Ebola into a local school. I mean, it's in a hospital. Hundreds of people visit hospitals every day. People get sick in hospitals anyway. So why introduce another contagion? I don't get it. I don't know what they're thinking.
I agree with you.
Totally, 100%.
I seem to be in the minority in this one. They have created these 4 facilities in the United States that are prepared initially for bioterrorism attack. Somebody trying to set off smallpox or Ebola in the United States. So that's the origin of these 4 medical facilities. And they are very much set up to take in patients who are considered level 4. They have
It's the CDC in Atlanta, which is set up for all kinds of
the same CDC that had the bacterial infectious things in Ziploc bags. That CDC.
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
in case we were wondering.
those guys. I feel really comfortable with that. Yeah. Bring them all over. Yeah.
But hospitals need to make money, and that's their prime goal, unfortunately, is to make money.
And the pharmaceutical companies.
I don't think they're making any money off of this because the care that they have to take to transport these 2 patients and to keep the air circulating and secure and the doors secure so that none of the virus can escape the facility, and the highly trained staff that they have working on these 2 patients and the decontamination. I doubt very much that this is currently a money-making proposition.
No, my point is actually that they're not making money off of this. Hospitals do need to make money, so how willing would someone be to take a patient in such a controversial way?
Well, it's only these 4 facilities in the United States that can take these particular patients. They're set up to be bioterrorism facilities, very secure facilities.
That we only have 4 of them in the entire country. That's a little bit frightening.
I think the fact that they're Americans, that's the bottom line. If they weren't allowed to come back into the United States, there'd be more fallout. I think people would be outraged.
Though. I think like what Gabrielle says, why couldn't they treat them where they were?
Exactly.
I'm not disagreeing or agreeing. I am just saying that had they refused to allow these Americans to come back to America, it would have opened a whole other
can of worms.
Perhaps.
Well, okay, so we have places like the Bikini Atoll. I don't know if we own it, but we owned it enough to do nuclear testing there.
The Marshall Islands?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's a rock in the middle of the ocean. Why not take them there? I mean, I just don't understand the logic here in bringing them into major cities, to be treated. I don't understand.
Well, it goes right back to what you were saying before. If they weren't American, would anybody know?
No.
And would anybody care if they came back?
Nobody cares about Ebola in Africa. They don't.
No. They would treat it in Africa.
Now all of a sudden you turn the news and it's the number 1 story.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because it's very controversial. I think a lot of people have concerns about them bringing Ebola into the United States.
Anything that removes folks from their comfort zone is going to become a main story. It's going to become big. Ebola was something that happened way, way far away, so they didn't have to worry about it.
From it.
And all of a sudden, and especially the media playing on, this is
24-hour news cycle.
Ebola has never been in the U.S. ever.
So, Deanna, I would like to know, because you brought up what I thought thought was a really great point. Now, I'm the pagan on the panel here, so I would be totally into your theory that Mother Nature will be able to cure whatever is going on with us if we leave her alone. We can't keep making these incursions into sensitive areas and expect nothing to happen.
Well, Mother Nature's getting back at us anyways. This will come to an end soon.
I do agree with you on one point, but then the discovery of new species and discoveries of new cures is what's driving people to do it, but there's no balance. I mean, we go in and we raise acres and acres of rainforest every day, supposedly.
Yes.
What's wrong with going in and respecting nature and doing the research and walking out the way you came in and not even leaving footsteps?
Too much money to be made, that's why. Too much money for the wood.
That's
frustrating.
Part of my anger, because dollar signs are always the bottom line with this. It always will be. And unless we look at that honestly, all of this talk is just talk. It's just talk.
And so you're bringing Americans back here because I think the pharmaceutical companies want to be able to develop some kind of a vaccine.
I was just going to say.
There you go.
We're talking about
and then charge $1 million.
Yes, how are the hospitals going to make money? Well, maybe not the hospital itself, but if a cure is found
that they probably already have.
So do we let people die? Do we ignore it and say, gee, the genie's out of the bottle, the virus has been released, it's in the environment, too bad, now we'll just let people die?